Hello everyone, and welcome to the final episode of the Tombstone Tours from here at Springhill Cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee. Over the last several weeks, I have visited the graves of country music royalty. People like the king of country music, Mr. Roy Acuff, and the queen of country music, Miss Kitty Wales. We've also visited the graves of George Morgan, Keith Whitley, Speck Rhodes, and Floyd Kramer, just to name a few. Last week I visited the grave of the great Earl Scruggs, and this week I'm going to walk just a few yards away to visit the final resting place of a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, the man known as the Singing Ranger, Hank Snow. Clarence Eugene Hank Snow was born on May 9th, 1914 in Queens County, Nova Scotia, Canada. Growing up in Canada, he was the child of a broken home. His mother and father divorced when he was only about 8 years old, and he was eventually sent to live with his paternal grandmother. She forbid him from contacting his mother or even seeing her. When he disobeyed, he was the subject of beatings and abuse from his grandmother, and this is something that Hank would never forget. Despite the beatings and abuse, Hank continued to sneak away and visit his mother, and he was eventually allowed to live with her in Liverpool. Life with his mother was a great improvement over the life he had with his grandmother, and shortly after reuniting with his mother, she ordered Hank a Hawaiian steel guitar. Hank set about teaching himself how to play the instrument, became so accomplished that he was soon playing for neighbors and at local functions around Liverpool. Music wouldn't pay the bills, and in 1926, Hank took a job as a cabin boy on a fishing schooner. He worked there for about 4 years. Then in August of 1930, in an area known as the Graveyard Atlantic, Hank's vessel was tossed for hours on end, but the ship and Hank survived. Hank learned later that 6 other ships had been lost and a total of 132 men had perished. This was the end of Hank's sailing career. Hank never lost his love for music, and in October 1936, he auditioned for RCA. The company was so impressed with him that they signed him to a recording contract and soon released his first 2 records, The Prison Cowboy and The Lonesome Blue Yodel. Hank's loyalty to the company was legendary, and he spent his entire career with the RCA label. His contract with RCA led him to appear on a weekly radio show on the CBC. This brought him national attention, and he began touring around Canada. Then in the 1940s, American radio started taking note of Hank and began playing his records. In 1949, Hank left his native Canada and moved to Nashville, where he became known as the Singing Ranger. In 1950, Hank recorded and released what would become his signature song, I'm Movin' On. This was Hank's first of 7 #1 hits and led him to the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. Hank followed up I'm Movin' On with the Golden Rocket and the Rumba Boogie. Both soared to the top of the country charts, remaining there for several weeks. Along with I'm Movin' On, Hank's second most requested song was I've Been Everywhere, a song about places throughout the United States. The rhyming series of cities were rattled off at a rapid pace, much like the chant of an auctioneer. While several have tried, very few artists could ever master the fast-paced song. Known for his lavish and colorful sequin suits, Hank was one of the most popular stars in country music. He and his Rainbow Ranch boys performed throughout the United States and the world. His success allowed him to buy a home and some property near Madison, Tennessee. He named the home the Rainbow Ranch after his band. The Rainbow Ranch was his and Minnie's home for almost 50 years. In a career that spanned more than 60 years, Hank Snow sold more than 80 million albums and was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1979. He was also inducted into the Canadian Country Music Hall of Fame in 1985. Even with all of his success, Hank never forgot the abuse that he suffered as a child. In an effort to curb and prevent child abuse, he established the Hank Snow International Foundation for the Prevention of Child Abuse. Hank was a tireless performer, and he continued his regular schedule until his health began to fail in the mid-1990s. Finally, his health forced him to retire to his Rainbow Ranch in 1996. 3 years later, on December 20th, 1999, Hank Snow, the Singing Ranger, passed away at the age of 85. Minnie continued to live at the ranch until her death at the age of 89 on June the 11th, 2003. Both Hank and Minnie are buried here in Springhill Cemetery. Their only son, Pastor Jimmy Snow, was the longtime host of Grand Ole Gospel Time from the stage of the Ryman Auditorium. He is still active in the ministry and lives here in Nashville. Hank and Minnie's Rainbow Ranch has been restored and appears just as it did when they lived there. Today, it's maintained as a vacation rental. Yes, if you're a fan of Hank Snow, you can actually stay in the house where he lived for almost 50 years. I'll put a link to the rental site in the description below. Well, this ends my visit to Springhill Cemetery here in Nashville, Tennessee. While we have visited many of the country music personalities that are resting here, there's still a lot more that I didn't visit. People like Jimmy Capps, Jan Howard, and Charlie Collins. Hopefully one of these days I can return and pay my respects to these and the others that are resting here. If this is your first time here, I'd like to welcome you and hope you find something interesting on my channel. Most of the content on this channel is cemetery related, and if you enjoy this type of content, I hope you'll consider subscribing and ringing that bell for notifications. And as always, a thumbs up is always appreciated. Now, like Hank Snow, I'm going to be moving on. So until next time, remember, life is a wonderful journey. Be sure to take time and enjoy it. And I'll see you down the road. So long, everybody.